let me just officially give a welcome and then share some instructions so we're on the same page. All right. Yeah. Hello again, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this session. I'm Darren from the Codementor team. This is the third session of our Developer Growth Summit 2022. So the talk is component testing with Vite, Vue, and Cypress. And if this is your first session at the summit, I just want to give some quick instructions before we introduce the speaker and topic. So we're using Zoom webinar, and it's completely normal that you can't see other people. But as you can see in the chat, people are talking, like there are a lot of you here. So make sure to set it to send to everybody. Otherwise, it defaults to host and panelists for some funny reason. You also notice a Q&A box on the bottom. That's where you can ask questions during the talk, and you can also upvote on the questions that you like. And yeah, like Jess was saying, like we'll try to make it interactive, and she's gonna take your suggestions on what she's going to build and demo. So it's gonna be fun. All right, last but not least, please follow our code of conduct so we can all have a good experience. The links should be all in the chat. And right now, let me officially introduce our speaker, Jessica Sachs. She is a staff engineer at Cypress, where she's building a new generation of front-end testing tools. So she's been coding for over 10 years now, and she now works professionally within the open source community. She's a core team member of both Cypress and Faker, and a contributor of Vue and Vitest. She's also an educator at Vue Mastery. Yeah, she's a lot of things, awesome things. Yeah, I think hopefully you're convinced now that she is the right person to speak about this topic. So, all right, Jess, yeah, it's your turn. Take it away.
Yeah, let's do it. It's my first time using the Zoom version of conference giving. So let's see if we can get this right. All right, desktop. Can everybody see, is the Zoom chat visible is my first question, or is it only my browser?
It looks like it's on your browser.
Nice. All right, so hello everybody, welcome to component testing with Vue, Vite, and Cypress. This is a workflow for headed testing and component-driven development. And hopefully at the end of this talk, you'll know what I mean by both of those terms. So let's get started. Hi, my name is Jessica Sachs. I go by Jess. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I work full-time in open source at Cypress building test runners. The lead architect of the Cypress component testing project and a contributor to Vue, Vite, and the Vitest communities. You'll see me a lot in Discord, just hanging out, answering questions. I also maintain the newly revived Faker.js library, which is used heavily for mock data in tests, and you'll see me use that when we test a business logic heavy product card toward the end. And I also used to create pop-ups for travel sites like Expedia and Priceline. So before I got into open source, I was doing evil on the web. And this is how I repent. So here is the agenda for today, fairly loosely. We're going to talk about some testing theory. This should take about 10 minutes. I want to introduce the testing types, which you'll see on the right. This is Kent C. Dodd's testing trophy. I view this as the successor to the testing pyramid, if you may have heard of it. It's a way to visualize different kinds of tests and their responsibilities, how many you should have of each kind, etc. We'll do a quick tour of a Cypress end-to-end project so that we can discuss how to think like a user and break down where component testing sits in everything. So it'll be very helpful to kind of root ourselves and give contrast between component testing versus end-to-end testing. It's also going to use the new Cypress 10 UI, which isn't released yet. And I'm very excited to show you. It's a very beta version of Cypress. I think I tested it well enough to use it in this demo. We're going to build a stepper component and learn how to test that. That would be, you'll see it in a minute. And then we're going to use Vuetify's tests. I added Cypress component testing to Vuetify, which is kind of like material UI for Vue, one of the biggest component libraries for Vue. I added Cypress component testing back when it was in alpha, like week 1 of alpha, and they've been using it for a year. I opened it up and I was like, holy crap, this stuff is great. And I wanted to use it in this talk. So we'll look at that, and we'll add tests for a component that they currently don't test, the radio button. And then finally, we'll talk about components that make network requests. So the product list component, I use this in my workshop. I teach at Vue Toronto, and then I have an upcoming one in VueConf US in June. So first, though, let's talk about why do we test? I want to get a read on the room here. So please write into chat. How experienced are people with testing? Do we have any absolute beginners? Like, I have never written a test before in JavaScript. I will wait about 30 seconds. Absolute beginner. Welcome, Emily. Welcome, Reed. Okay, Patrick, Vitest utils, very nice. All right, we have over 10 absolute beginners, I think. So let's talk about why do we test? So we have two reasons, I think, why we test. We have these concrete reasons, which are if you had to explain to your business-minded manager, non-technical manager, what would you say on why you need to spend time testing? We wouldn't say the first bullet point. That's kind of personal. It's like, so we can code cool things, obviously, but more so our business doesn't lose money, and we really don't lose our users' goodwill and respect, because when things break, users suffer, right? And business suffers. And the first bullet point, I think, will make sense later on. But basically, you have to keep things less complex and less cool if you don't have coverage. You get to build cooler systems, you get to build fancier UI, fancier features, if you have security to move quickly. So here are some intrinsic reasons why we test. We want confidence in our code. We want to make sure that we can sleep at night. We want speed so we can move quickly and work messily. I'm taking a drawing class right now, actually, and one of the things they drill into you is working messy. A lot of times in code, when you don't have the ability to, when you don't have confidence or security or tests, you have to take your time very slowly and plan out your plan of attack. And this is a good idea even when you have tests. But when you don't, it's critical because you will make a mistake when working in complex systems. However, when you have tests, you get to work a little bit messily and kind of build forward without looking back too much. Finally, you want accountability to yourself and the Zoom chat, others, yes. Zoom chat was covering my slide. And you want accountability to yourself and others. You want to be able to say, yes, this works, period, with as much confidence as possible. So those are the reasons why I test. So I can code cool things quickly and explain to the business stakeholders at my company that our stuff works and that our users can trust us. Let's see. I'm checking the chat now. How do you get a startup business? How do you get, so from Azariah, I think I said this right. How do you get a startup business-minded person to take quality seriously? The startup I'm working for opted for quick and dirty. How do you convince experienced devs to test their code and take it seriously? Okay. Let's mark that. That's a really good question. We will get to that at the end. Okay, so for people who are new to testing, there are many different kinds of tests. There are about 20-something tests, testing types. that you can find easily on the internet. So one of the ways you can figure out the different testing types and what they're for is by Googling for testing types space quality assurance, because QA engineers have spent the last 30, 40 years figuring out how to test software, and software developers have not. And so we have a basic understanding of about 4 testing types in the software development circle. But if you're to expand and just add that quality assurance or quality engineer tag onto your Google search, you will learn very quickly about the breadth of information and different testing types and what they're for. But day-to-day, software engineers only deal with about these 4. And static is a very recent addition and is only applicable to projects that use a linter or a type-safe, TypeScript or Flow or whatever. Cool. So let's see. I'm reading the chat again. Third reason, Bart, you're doing great. Thank you for helping. All right, so very specifically in code, this is how I would characterize an end-to-end test. You visit an external URL like Vue.js.org. You think like a user by looking for text. So if I were to go to Vue.js.org, let's see if we can bring this up side by side. If I were to go to Vue.js.org, I would, as a user, say, I want to find the install button, and you're thinking of it via text. You're like, all right, I'm going to find the install button and I'm going to click it. That's what this says. I know that, oh, there we go. And I'm going to click it. I'm going to change pages and hopefully I see quick start. Quick start is actually probably a very bad selector here because I would easily rename this. But the point is that you're visiting either a public website or a prod-like website on localhost. You're making real network requests. So in my test framework, I would be making real network requests against the, let's find the domains, against things like viewjobs.com, right? These are completely unrelated to my application as I'm developing it as a developer, but to the user, these are real things that are going to happen on their computer. And the end-to-end test makes sure that all of the bits work together. It makes sure that this external domain works with my website, if my website is Vue.js.org. And finally, you'll notice that we went to multiple pages. We went from the homepage onto the getting started page. And that's kind of 3 characteristics of an end-to-end test. Now, zooming back out, what about integration tests? What's the difference between an integration test and an end-to-end test? So characteristics of an integration test. A page-based integration test. You'll notice the difference in a second. In a page-based integration test, it's basically identical, except that you might mock the network. You might say that instead of waiting for Vue jobs/sponsors, you're going to intercept that request and respond with some fake data. Faker is the library that I maintain. It gives you some fake company names that look somewhat realistic. And you would respond with that fake data without going over the network. Finally, you would visit that same site, that same viewjs.org site, except it wouldn't be on the internet, it would be on your local machine. And you would perform the same steps. There are reasons to choose an integration test over an end-to-end test. Many, many reasons. I'm not going to talk about them. I'm just trying to give you an intuition on some signals that you might use to classify what one testing type is to another. Cool. Next, we're going to talk about component testing, which is the talk we're actually in, which is that instead of visiting a web page, you're going to mount a component. And this API is practically identical to Vitest utils. For the users who have used Vitest utils, I saw a few fly by in the chat. I'm using a JSX or TSX syntax here. I will explain why once we start coding a little more. After you mount your component, it's basically like a visit. You're going to find something on the page. You want to make sure that the component is behaving as expected. In this component, I'm imagining that it has an array of sponsors. It should have the number of sponsors that we passed in, let's say 10. And then it should contain maybe the sponsor's name somewhere in that list. Some of the qualities, some of the characteristics, you use props to pass in the data, though you can use network level mocks like we did with Sci-intercept. So let's say sponsors didn't take in a prop. Whoever wrote it decided sponsors is responsible for its own data. You would use something like Sci-intercept here, instead of passing it in as a prop. Doesn't really matter. Cypress is kind of cool like that. You can mock on the network level as well as on the prop level, which is really, really convenient actually. And you perform these steps to figure out if all of the sponsors have been rendered in the way they're supposed to be. Great. Second characteristics is that the components compile the same way they do locally. So when you import sponsors view, it runs through the same code paths that it does when you're building your own website. Third point is that it's a single page, right? You're not navigating between pages. You could mount a component that represented an entire page, but the moment, let's go back to our Vue example here. You could mount this entire page with SciMount. You could mount app, I would call it, right? SciMount app. But the moment you click install, that becomes an integration test. So that's when you switch from component-based testing to page-based testing. I would say you could still call it an integration test, right? You could still be mocking this network layer, but that is the moment in which you switch, is when it becomes from a single page to a multi-page test. Finally, for component tests, you have two kinds of users. You have end users, who are the people that are thinking about things like, is the sponsor's name on the page? And then you have developer users who are thinking about things like slots and props. And how do you use this component, right? The developer cares about the fact that there is a sponsor's key here. The user doesn't. The user cares that the sponsor's name is here. So you have two user types that your tests need to account for and think about. So that's an overview of the testing types. We haven't talked about unit and static, and there's so many resources, I'm not going to talk about them. All right. So now we're going to spend the next 30 minutes building and testing various components. We're gonna test things like this little counter here. Here's some code for it. Here's some Vue SFC code using script setup. Here's a test that localhost refused to connect. I think I crashed my server. It's a bummer, but it doesn't matter because we're about to switch. All right, so it's time to do the coding and time to show you Cypress. Let us back out. We are inside of the stress-free testing repository, and it is time to open Cypress for the first time. So we're going to type in yarn Cypress open global while I look at the chat. Emily. All right. Emily says, when you test find by text, are you testing how it works with screen readers for accessibility reasons? That's a really good question. That is a super, super good question. I use something called, let's see, which selector to use testing library. So I use this page always to guide me about how to find elements on my page. So find by text is really helpful when you're trying to, oh, they cut them all off. Here's the priority. This is the priority of the selectors that you can use when trying to find elements. Screen readers are very much a part of that. Get by role. This can be used to query every element that is exposed in the accessibility tree with their name, label text, placeholder text, and then get by text. So outside of forms, text content is the main way users find elements. So not only does it help you with screen readers and to naturally build a more accessible website, but it also helps your tests to test what the user is actually interested in. So in our Vue example here, the user is actually interested in the concept of, oh my God, how do I set up Vue install? Great. So if this install button disappears, it can be problematic for the user to figure out where to go, is the short answer. So accessibility reasons are a large part of it. I highly suggest reading through testinglibrary.com, queries about. I'm just going to paste that here. Okay. All right, so I think we're at the point where we're going to start using Cypress. I have about 5 projects we're going to go through. First, let us go through a quick tour of the UI. This is Cypress 10. This is Cypress 10 in global mode. Global mode just means you can switch between projects pretty easily. It's helpful for people who have a lot of Cypress projects, like us, the people who work on it, or component library developers. So you may not have seen this before. So let's go through and add end-to-end testing, I think. Yeah, let's add end-to-end testing to our stress-free testing project. I'm on a specific branch. You can see what branch I'm on right here. It's called local 10 stores with 10x, which is a terrible branch name. I'm very sorry. And you can see that I have component testing configured. I've used this project as part of my workshop. And we are able to look at component testing, and then we're also able to set up end-to-end testing for the first time. So we'll do that. We'll set it up as a JavaScript project, hit next. It requires me to make some changes in my Cypress config file. Let's see, do I have that up? Possibly. Cypress config. Let's see. Going to merge this in very nicely, save it. Everything's good to go, and we'll continue. And we're able to test with a multitude of different browsers. I have Edge on my machine. Didn't realize that it shipped with Mac now, but it does. And we're going to open up Chrome. And I have no end-to-end tests for this project right now. So it'll let me scaffold some example specs. In Cypress 10, we give you the ability to scaffold new specs or create an empty spec. Cypress added a bunch of specs that teach me how to use it. So it added, I don't know, I guess 12, 15 files. And we can see them here. These are all the tests that were added to my project. And we can go through the getting started test. So we have what's called the command log or reporter on the left side. And you'll see Cypress doing its thing. This is an end-to-end test, so it takes a little longer than the component tests do. It does a little more. It waits for URLs, is the biggest difference between the component and end-to-end testing. And then we can go around and we can play around with different advanced examples. And this stuff is really cool, I think. Which one's a good one? Let's try actions. This teaches you all the different things that you can do in Cypress. If you're looking for an example of how to learn Cypress, this is one of the ways I would recommend it is just starting a new Cypress project, hitting scaffold, and then kind of looking through these tests in this little playground, right? Scroll into Vue allows you to target something like this I'm here button and scroll it into Vue. Really convenient stuff. So for users that have used Cypress before, are familiar with it with end-to-end, that's what it looks like in Cypress 10. And now let's head over to component testing. So component testing is very similar. The only difference is that it does not visit web pages, it mounts things. So let's start with tabs are pretty. Let's start with the tabs. Let's see. I had my thing very expanded. There we go. So with component testing, the coolest part about component testing in Cypress is that your example is live. So you can play around with it after your test is done. So my test just made sure that the books text exists, it can be clicked on, and that it reacts when I interact with it. And I have actually a lot of spies on the events. So this component, this tabbed component, emits events, using Vue's emit. And I bound a spy onto it. So you can see what text and such is being emitted in these events. And if you're familiar with Vue dev tools, it's the exact same concept. Cypress is pretty cool in that whenever you click on, whenever you click on something in the command log, it will tell you what arguments it was called with. And so this allows you to play around. Does subject exist here? I don't think so. No. This allows you to play around with the DOM elements that were found. Let's say books was found. It yielded this element, which is actually really, really cool. And you can also see the stub select spy was called 26 times. And every time I click on another component here, you'll see that the spy is incremented. So it's a really interactive way to develop. So that's a quick demo of component testing and end-to-end testing in Cypress 10. Now I want to pause and take a look at the chat, because at this point, we can do one of three things. We can build something together. I can show you the workflow for how I essentially test drive component development. We can look at Vuetify's existing tests, or we can take a look at components that make network requests. So that would be our product list over here, which has an async event to wait for all of these products to load. And then you can play around with them. All right, so I'm going to pause. 18 new messages, holy shit. Choose your own adventure. Let's see. Q&A box.
Yeah, there's a couple in the Q&A box as well.
I know, I see. Which browser engines are supported? Everything but WebKit, Patrick. Let's see. Richard, can Cypress be used for testing in mobile app dev too? Probably technically, we don't officially support it. We don't support WebKit. So if your mobile app is a React native app that also compiles to web, you can test it in web, but not natively. I would use, I'm actually not up to date. I started my career in mobile app QA actually, but I'm not up to date on the latest. And any mesh. Let's see, the difference between end-to-end and integration. Does this tool work for other testing methodologies like stress testing as well? That's loaded. End-to-end testing tests, it's a spectrum is the reason this is a hard question. It's a spectrum. End-to-end testing tests things as much like a user as possible. it may hit a real website hosted on the internet the same way your user will. Integration testing may start to mock different parts of that. Like if you have an expensive API that hits a third-party service, let's say you're using something like Twilio to make phone call API requests, right? You're using things like an overlay chat box that's a third-party API. An integration test would start to mock out those elements that aren't really core to your product, if that makes any sense. Black box testing, yes. Black box testing is essentially you know nothing about your the internals of what you're testing, and Cypress component testing is extremely black box by nature. All you're doing is mounting the component with props, and you aren't getting at the internal instance of it. You'll see that when if we have time to build stuff.
Yeah,
Dan.
there's some stuff in chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so different time zones. I'm not going to do that today. Build a component, FAQ panel thing, choose your vendor. All right, Dan, we're doing Vuetify. You win. So I'm going to show you the cool tests I found in the Vuetify repo yesterday night. It was really awesome. So this is the Cypress app. We're going to go to the launch pad and switch projects using global mode. So we're going to go back to the projects list, and we're going to go to Vuetify, click on that, go into Vuetify's component tests. This is Vuetify Next. So this is the stuff that hasn't been released yet. If people are following the how far along Vuetify is in their development. So Vuetify is also a very large project with a lot of CSS. So you may see it takes a minute to load. So let's start with the one I find prettiest is the color picker, honestly. And it'll take a second to load because they have a lot of CSS and Sass. So this component is a canvas-based component. Right here's canvas, and we can kind of dig into it. If I want to understand this component better, I can open up the Chrome inspector and click on it and see that it's just a canvas component and that it contains, let's close some of this. You can honestly step through the entire DOM hierarchy. It's pretty cool. Oftentimes when I'm developing, I will exclusively use, that's actually not true. Not oftentimes when I'm developing. I exclusively use Cypress to develop new components. Previously, I would create playgrounds in order to create all of these different scenarios in which I could exploit the component, like make it short or wide, 3 columns, 2 columns. And now I exclusively use Cypress for this. So I can play around and see how my component might work, right? You can see this alpha slider changing in real time. It allows me to find a lot of bugs. I didn't stress test Vuetify's stuff. I could probably find a bug in it though if I use Cypress and manually test it. Dan, what else do you want to see? Do we want to build do you want to build a component? Do we want to build the Vuetify radio component? I'm going to use this. All right. He says yes. I'm going to use this cute feature. It's called Open in IDE. It opens VS Code to the IDE. And from there, we're going to go to vRadio TSX. And so vRadio TSX seems, I actually don't work on Vuetify, so I don't know much about this code, but I know how to test it, which is to render the vRadio and use it like a user. I'm going to use the documentation to help me drive what the expected requirements should be. Let's go to the Cypress UI and create a new spec. The path for this is inside of source components vRadio. They have a pattern of putting their tests under underscore tests. So components vRadio under tests. and they like to put spec in front of their psi. All right, oh, V radio. Very nice, we've created our spec. It's very bare bones. Let's go and run it. It should be empty the first time we see it. And that is fine. Let's open it and import vRadio. I actually like TSX. I don't know why I didn't rename it. I prefer TSX, and I will show you why momentarily. So we're going to import vRadio. I think it's a named export from vRadio dot TSX, which you emit up one. Very nice. I've set up a psi mount command for this project a while ago. And this should render our vRadio. Oh, it's sad because I changed the extension. That's fine. vRadio. Perfect. All right, and here's our radio button. It looks pretty ugly, but it works. You can click it to turn it on. And let's look at the Vuetify documentation to see how it should work. So Vuetify, vRadio. So what is supposed to happen with this vRadio? They like to have radio groups. I don't want to do radio groups. That's too much for us right now. But radios have labels. It's one of the things we have. And they have slots for the labels and they have props for the labels. So let's try that. Let's test that the radio button both accepts a slot for a label and a prop for a label. So we have our very basic radio button, just making sure that it works at all. And then we have our, I usually split it side by side. So it renders a slot as a label. It renders a label prop. So I'll probably have something like label, faker, company, verb. Do I have faker in here? I think so. Faker from faker. No. I thought I had it. That's okay. Hello world. Label is label. And so we should get a hello world here. And so this is the first part. You would mount and then you can find by text. I wonder if I have this. I don't. Get, let's say, the input of type radio. Should contain text label. So we want to make sure that the, oh, I'm wrong. I'm totally wrong, but it's going to tell me why. I love Cypress like this. I want to make sure that the label contains hello world, not that the input does, which is a very noob mistake, but is why I like Cypress. Very nice. So now we're green. So I had typoed this selector. I was like, okay, maybe the input should contain the label text that we see right here. But I was wrong. And what I really wanted to do was find the label. And that was really easy to see because I was able to open up the Chrome DevTools and check that the inner text right here exists. We'll do the same test for the label slot. And in this case, if we look at the documentation here, you can look at the code for Vuetify and see that the label here is a scoped slot. It's a named and scoped slot. So in JSX, and this might be a little bit weird for people, sorry, but with slots, you can just expand them in. Let's see. Slots, label should be a function. So let's call it label. And this will return text. I think I'm butchering the syntax. It's not happy with me. Yeah, I think I messed up the syntax and I can't remember it offhand. I wrote this last night, which is the frustrating part. Here is I have like a working example of VRadio. If I check the chat, Bart is probably yelling, or Mark is probably yelling at me.
Extra space after the ...
You think?
It's said.
Oh. Womp womp.
I see, yeah.
It's okay. I can give up on this. That's really frustrating because I do this in my sleep, but I'm having demo jitters. Okay. Last bit, I would say, if we're going to skip the slots, I would do disabled. That's one of the things that this radio button can be, is disabled. And so we can get the input of type radio. And let's focus on it. So we're only looking at it. And if the radio is disabled, I imagine that clicking on it should do nothing, which is true. It does nothing. And I want to make sure that it is disabled. So it should be disabled. And then the test passes. If I were to break the VRadio, which I don't think I can easily do because Vuetify does a lot of meta programming. Oh, see, this is the syntax for slots. Yeah, if I were to break this, you would see it. You would see it fail. But they have a lot of meta programming going on under the hood that I'm completely unaware of, which is kind of the point of integration testing your components. Is like I have no idea how this radio is built. All I know is that the docs say, and this is the developer user type I mentioned earlier. The docs say, if I use the disabled prop, the radio button should be disabled. And that's really all that matters. I kind of find that really elegant, is being able to jump into a code base you don't work in at all and write tests for it because you're thinking like a user. So this would be the radio test, a very rudimentary radio test. Yeah. Okay, cool. So I think I'm at time. Yeah, we took 45 minutes.
Yeah, we're at time, unless there's something, relatively short that you wanted to try out. Otherwise, I think we could,
I think we could cut it. That's 30. Yeah. I think my slides have disappeared. I have a set of links and where to learn. Let's see, I could probably just put it up here.
Yeah.
Vuetify. So give me a hot second to put on my
great
PNPM dev. Very nice. And yeah, so I would go to one of these 3 links, the SciLearn site, really helpful. If you've never used Cypress before, you can get started with your first application. We have example repositories for component testing. There's a ton of them. This works with Vue CLI, Vite, React, Create React App, Tailwind, and then finally the component testing page. So that's all I have. Yeah. Thank you so much. And yeah, Dan, if you want to reach me after, if you have extra questions, I'm always free on the Twitters. So I will put my Twitter handle here. My DMs are open. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much, Jess. I definitely say that this is one of the more interesting sessions that I've seen. You know, it's very interactive and kind of yeah, it's chill. I like it. I feel like we're all doing this together. I mean,
it was a very mini workshop feel. I think it was probably the most unstructured presentation I've given. I'm not sure if I like the stress of it, but and the timing of it is difficult. But overall, I was very happy to be able to share the brand new UI with everybody.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that with us. Yeah, so you mentioned best ways to reach you is Twitter. Yeah, okay, my colleague just put the
oh my gosh, Christine's the best.
Yeah, she's really helpful. So yeah, I think Twitter is the best way. I mean, that's how I got connected to Jess, and she is quite responsive. Yeah, so follow her, connect with her, and talk more about testing. Yeah, Jess, before we go, do we have any final thoughts or encouragement that you want to share with everybody before we head out?
I would encourage people to get into the notion of developing their isolation. Even if you don't use Cypress, look at tools like Storybook or History, which is a Vue version that one of the Vue core authors released. Component-driven development really sells Cypress component testing. Thinking of your components as individual blocks and not rendering them in the page when you first build them. I think that's what I would like people to take away from it is develop in sandboxes, add it to the page later. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you, Jess. That is the official end of the session. So thank you all for joining and contributing, interacting with one another. Yeah, quick reminder, some bookkeeping stuff again. We have a swag giveaway, so we'd love for you to share learnings and what you saw in the session, something you liked, whatever you want to share on your socials. But don't forget to use the hashtag DGS2022. That's going to help you, help increase your chance to win the swag. If you want to be a speaker at your own event or attend more events in the future, check out the Codementor Events homepage. Again, my colleague has posted the links in the chat. The next event, as you can see on here, is getting started as an OSS contributor. That's open source, yeah, and contributor and maintainer. That is 2 p.m. Pacific time, which is about 2 hours, something like that. Yeah, I'm not in Pacific time, so I'm just trying to estimate. Anyway, so the webinar will be open for another 5 minutes with this information showing. Feel free to chat with other people, connect, share LinkedIn, Twitter with each other, whatever you want to do. But after that, we're going to have to close the webinar for setup until the next event. And the link is the same. So please use it to join us for future ones. Thank you so much for coming and enjoy the rest of your day.